Anybody here read the book in the past, Five Love Languages? Anyone? Yeah, it's been around for a long time, right? And I think it's one of those things that people like to give young married couples or people that are about to get married. Hey, you should read this. And if you haven't read it, the idea behind it's pretty simple. It's just that we're not always the best at communicating because we kind of speak in different languages and we receive love in different ways. So he lays out 5 different ways, kind of these big groups of ways that people tend to be able to receive love, and that we often miscommunicate. We're trying to say I love you in a certain language, but they only hear it in this other. So for instance, a son who might say of his dad, my dad never once told me he loved me. It just never happened. He never said the words, I love you. But what did that dad do? Maybe his whole life he worked hard and he put a roof over his head and he provided for him. He was speaking his language of love, which was service, acts of service. By serving you, I'm saying that I love you. But what the kid who maybe receives it from words of affirmation, he needed to hear his dad say, I love you, son. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we get our anybody here read it recently? What's a young married couple in the room? Have you read it recently? Do you know your love language? What's that? Oh, nice.
We still read it.
Still read, yeah, okay.
So what's your love language, if you don't mind?
Yeah, do you know?
Number 1, acts of service.
Acts of service.
Acts of service, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
Changed over the years.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine used to be food and money. And now is
Now it's physical touch. I love you. Big guy. Why do you reject my love?
I just don't feel it. It wasn't the same for me.
No. I think sometimes we need to recognize, let's take this out of the idea of just marriage or father-daughter or just family, but let's look at the bigger context of our culture and say, is it possible that we might be trying to love a culture in a way that they don't receive it, or that they are trying to get us to love them in a way that we're saying, I'm sorry, that's not love. That love actually has a definition that we're interested in bringing into the public arena, talking about, but we need to talk about this, I think, as a community. We need to talk about what is love.
You can miss each other, right? I mean,
he doesn't get it.
I did miss it.
No, go ahead.
We live in in North America, an increasingly secular world. So we use terms like love, but hopefully we're using them from a biblical context. Mm-hmm. And of course, a world without God uses the same terms, but maybe they mean different things. Can we, for the sake of this conversation, I want to give you a little context of the scripture itself. Mm-hmm. This scripture was written to the church in Rome. This passage, the book of Romans, was written to the believers in Rome. Now, why is that important? Because Rome, at the time of this writing, was the geopolitical center of the world. All roads led to Rome. And so Rome was the political center, it was the economic center, it was the power center. It was even, in a weird, funny way, the religious center. The Roman emperors were viewed and perceived as gods. In fact, Roman citizens, every once in a while, one of the emperors, one of the Caesars, would kind of do what we would call a vote of confidence and demand that all of the citizens make a new pledge, a new pledge of allegiance to the emperor as this god figure. So if you've ever been around people that our oldest son worked in Washington, D.C. for several years, and we were able to observe our capital up close. And wherever there is power, wherever there is money, wherever there is those structures of influence, you have alongside of that incredible amount of infighting, competition, dog-eat-dog sort of environment, that goes with those issues of power. And so Rome was that to the T. There was all kinds of political undercurrents, and there was jostling for position, and there was favoritism, and there was betrayal. In the middle of all this, Paul writes to the Romans, and listen, this is Romans 12. We're going to be starting right around verse 11, but Romans 1 and 2, that's a passage we oftentimes will memorize. What does Romans 1 and 2 12, 1 and 2 say. It says, I beg you, brothers, Paul says, I beg you, brothers, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as living sacrifices, he says, holy and acceptable unto God. Do not be conformed anymore to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might demonstrate what is the good and acceptable will of God. Think about what he's saying here. He's saying that the world, you Roman people, the people, you believers living in, you Jesus followers living in Rome, the world all around you wants to squeeze you into its mold. Wants you to think like they think. Wants you to act like they act. And Paul is exhorting this group of people, this isn't you. You may live there, you may live in their midst, but this is not how you're to be. And that is the mark of a follower of Jesus. We don't take our cues from a world around us. We take our cues from a risen Savior, and then we live it out in the world around us.
So the context that he's describing there would be really hostile to Christianity. I just want to point that out because I think sometimes we get a wrong idea in our head that, oh man, the early church had just exploded, so there was somehow this perfect environment in which they just thrived. But the perfect environment in which they thrived was an environment that tried to kill them and persecute them and destroy them. And they then in return tried to love back. Tried to love in return. And this was in a culture that would have been like abhorrent to them, would have been disgusting to them, especially, well, in 54 AD, all the Jews were kicked out of Rome and they started trickling back. It wasn't until 5 years later they started to come back, and this was written sometime when they started to come back, and some of them came back as Christian believers back into the Christian church. Not all of them, but a minority of them would have been. And some of the rituals that the Romans would have went through in their different worship services would entail things like bathing in blood. I mean, just imagine the good Jewish boy there. Like, you do what? You do what? And Paul is exhorting them love. But he starts out talking to them amongst themselves. Let's read here in Romans 12, starting in verse 9. It says, love must be sincere without hypocrisy. In other words, it's not a mask. Love isn't something that we just, I love you, right? That's a face that I'm putting on. Like, I love you needs to be sincere. Hypocrisy was it was a word used for a mask that was in theater, right? I can't show this emotion, so I'm just going to put this mask on that has a smile on it. Or I need to show I'm sad, so I put this mask on that has. But he's talking about a sincere love. He says, hate what's evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality.
You ever heard the term, you ever used this, and I've said this, my heart's just not in it. Yeah. When you're being asked to do something that you don't feel, and so you say, okay, I'll do it, but my heart's not in it. As we unpack this morning and we talk about this word love, I believe that if you would liken your heart to a well, that if there's not anything in the well, there's nothing to draw out to give. And that what's in that well is very, very important. And so I believe when Paul says love must be sincere, that theater thing when they would put the mask on, it didn't matter what was in their heart. It was just this mask that portrayed the emotion. But Paul's saying, no, you have to have something in your heart in order to give. And so he leads off, and right after this, it's interesting, he goes from love and then he uses the word hate in the same context. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Why would he say that? Haters today, that's a big thing, isn't it, in our culture? Right? You're not a hater, are you? You don't disagree with me, do you? Hey, I think this about you, fill in the blank for whatever the issue is. And if you disagree with me, you're not one of those haters, are you? One of those bigots. But you think about in a marriage relationship, or in any kind of, let's just say a male-female relationship where you're more than friends. Listen, that relationship demands that certain things be left out in order that what is left inside is real. Right? In other words, if your fiance says, well, you know, I love you, but I also love, you know, her and her and her and her, you're like, no, wait a minute, that is not going to work. By virtue of definition, intimacy is something where I've closed the circle. I've chosen you. I've left them out to make this meaningful. Well, that's what Paul is saying here. In order to truly love, there are some things we have to hate, or they cancel each other out, or better yet, they contaminate each other.
The next piece there of clinging to what is good, that word cling, it has a sexual connotation to it in the original. It's intimate. It's something close and personal, right? Part of it, when I read the scripture, part of it reminded me of when my kids were little, and you come home from work and they want to sit on your feet. You remember, you know, and you ever try to walk with a kid on each foot? You know, and they're just clinging to they've wrapped themselves around you. You try to shake them off and you can't. You know, they're on there. And then you just walk around the house with I couldn't do that anymore. They're too big. But when they were little, you know, I could do that. There was a time when we were watching a little boy. His name was Antonius, and he was at our house all the time. And at that time, I lived and worked kind of right in the same place. So I could pop into my house all the time and, you know, just say hi or grab a sandwich or whatever. But if I was only going to be there for a few minutes, I wouldn't take my shoes off. I'd just stay on the linoleum and I wouldn't walk on the carpet. I'd make my sandwich and I'd leave. And he'd figured out that if I took my shoes off, it meant I was staying home. And if I left my shoes on, he was just little, but if I left my shoes on, I would be leaving. And so he would sit on my feet and start untying my shoes. Right? Because he wanted me to stay. Like, don't go back to work. Stay here with me. He'd start untying my shoes. And that picture just stuck in my mind, like clinging to what is good, clinging to our Father, just hanging on to him. Like, let's get his shoes off and make him stay. Right? Let's just keep in this place for a while. That's the idea of filling up our tank. If you haven't spent time clinging to your Father's feet, walking around wherever he wants to go and not letting go, being drug around his house for a while, if you haven't done that, then the chances of you getting out of that into another place and being able to love her, well, I think they're zero. I think they're really slim. Maybe you'll be able to love for a little while just on sheer willpower, but eventually someone's going to rub you the wrong way, someone's going to say the wrong thing, and you're done, right? The grace is over, and you're ready to blast them.
This thing, hate what is evil. Have you ever known anybody that... you know, let's just take a friendship, for example. There are certain things for that friendship to function and to flourish that have to be there, and there are certain things, like I said earlier, that have to be kept out. So pornography in a marriage cannot possibly coexist without blowing up sooner or later, because there's a trespasser. Gossip and friendship cannot coexist for very long before the thing blows up. Slander and bitterness, you know, the things that you can make your list of negatives. This is what Paul is saying here. For this good that we're after, who doesn't want to be loved? Who doesn't want to be in a quality relationship? Who doesn't want a faithful mate or a flourishing marriage? But what Paul is saying here is, and this is what our culture is not saying. Our culture is saying you can have it both ways. You can have an open marriage. You can don't let anybody judge you in your, what your actions are. But it doesn't jive with real life. You cannot have unfaithfulness and all these other things and have true love and true friendship or a true relationship. They cannot coexist for long. You can fake it for a while. You can hold it together for a while, but sooner or later, that relationship is going to die. This is what Paul is saying here. So do I hate injustice? Do I hate evil? Do I hate perversion? Or am I living in this weird detente where I think we can peacefully coexist here? No, you can't. Don't be fooled. It's an illusion.
Think of it like an environment. Your heart and your mind are an environment that things live in. Is the environment of your heart, is the environment of your mind, is it conducive? Is it hospitable to the Holy Spirit? Is it a place where he wants to take off his shoes and stay and hang out? Or has it become toxic? Is it hospitable to people around you? Is if someone had to live in your mind for a while,
Ouch.
if someone needed to live in your heart for a while, would that be a place that people would be comfortable or not? And hey, let's be honest. The heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. It's a lot of things. We know what we come from. So in other words, we're going to have to add some stuff to this environment to make it workable. When I was a kid, we had a pool, and it was my responsibility to take care of the pool all the time. And so I became a pool expert, right? I'm checking the pH balance of the pool, and I'm making sure the right chemicals are in there and not the wrong thing. And if algae starts to grow, then you got to do this other thing. And I was cleaning it all the time, and I was constantly working on the environment of that pool. But my goal was to make that pool an environment that was toxic to algae, to life. Sometimes, because we lived out in the middle of nowhere in the country, a frog would jump in, and if I didn't find him till morning, he'd come out white. Right? Because he's been bleached by the chlorine. He's still like moving, but I'm like, dude, you got to get out of here. This is not the right pool for you. And I think there's something to this, guys, right here. Like, is our heart like that? Do people jump in and then jump out like blasted? Mm-hmm. Or could they actually hang out there? Could they grow there with you? Because we were talking about the greater community, the kingdom of God. None of us are a pool unto ourselves. We're all swimming in the same pool, man. You pee in this pool and we're all in it. I'm sorry.
And that's on the
gross.
internet, folks, right now.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that's gross. But how do you think your relationship with so-and-so across the aisle is going to work? Do you think that can just be your own thing and it's not going to affect the rest of us? Because I guarantee you it will. I guarantee you it will.
This pond is called church. Isn't that crazy? This pond we're describing is called church. Listen to the next verse. It says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. I pray you would read and capture these words slowly this morning. Think about environments that you have to maybe work in or function in where this is the opposite, where everybody is out for number one. There is no culture of honor. It's just a culture of dishonor. Paul is saying in this pond called the church, he says, be devoted to one another and honor one another above yourselves. Listen, the church is God's idea to make this happen. Church on the Hill is one church. I know there's a global church, but let's forget that for just a second. I believe in the global church, and there are many churches in town, and they're great churches. But in this particular pond called Church on the Hill, what is that environment? Is that would an outsider describe us that way? You know, I went to this pond. I took a swim in this Church on the Hill pond, and man, I was amazed how devoted they were to one another.
It was refreshing.
I just came away. I really felt like there was a genuine love there. Wouldn't that be amazing if that was the kind of, and I think in some degree it is, the atmosphere that we've created individually and then corporately. No one would say, that was the most perfect place I've ever been in. Yeah, we laugh because we know those places do not exist. Mm-hmm. But most people, at some point in time, well, we're gonna read on here. He says, keep your spiritual fervor. In other words, the word there, that phrase that Paul uses in the original language is maintain your spiritual life at a boiling point. Keep the thing hot, right? Keep it bubbling, keep it boiling, that there's a temperature. When you go into a doctor's office for whatever reason, the first thing they do is sit down, take your blood pressure, take your temperature, right? Those are called your vital signs. If those signs are bad, odds are something else is bad inside of you. That's why they call them vital signs, right? Paul's saying here, what's your temperature? Am I faithless? Am I just a big grump? Am I just consumed with lust? What is the temperature of my soul? He's not talking about your IQ here or the amount you can bench press. He's talking about your spiritual condition. What is the condition of my soul?
Isn't warmth important too? You ever jumped into water that was way too cold and you're like, oh, it just takes your breath away, right? You just want to get out as fast as you can. That's the Oregon beach. Right? That's what we have to work with. Like the kids get all excited the first time you take them, they put on their swimming suits and they run and then they turn around and run back. Like, what have you done? And so is this a warm place? Is this is it comfortable here? Is the temperature of the room, I mean, we talk about it. Like, what just happened in worship? Did the temperature come up? Mm-hmm. Did it get comfortable? Is it like, oh yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be? This feels like, did you know that I feel like there's often two ways to come into church. One is you're just the thermometer. You come in and you judge whether or not it's warm or cold, right? You're just telling us, it's too cold in here. The music's too loud.
I didn't feel loved.
It's so dark. How do you even see each other?
Yeah.
You can just come in as a thermometer, and that's,
No one shook my hand. Yeah. Or too many people shook my hand. It's like.
Yeah. You're just judging what's happening in here. But the other way to come in the room is more like a thermostat. Like, I'm going to set the temperature. I'm going to change the environment of this room. If no one's being friendly to me, well, goodness, I'm going to go shake some hands. I'm going to get some friendship started in here. Mm-hmm. I'm adding to the environment of this house.
As a pastor, I've watched people for years come to church, and you can almost see it, that some people come in the door, and now listen, hear me carefully here, is they come to be loved. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I want to be loved. I want to be accepted. I want to be encouraged. And in fact, it would actually be great if you served me. And again, I say that there's not anything inherently wrong with those desires. The rub comes in when at some point God calls you to do that to others. So in other words, maybe you've come to church on the hill and you've come in here. And I'm just using Sunday morning, but it goes beyond Sunday morning. But you've come because you're broken, or you've come through some tough stuff, or you're just hurting right now. You're in a season that's tough. And man, I want to be sensitive. We want to be sensitive to that. And so you're in a position where you need to be loved, and you need to be served, and you need to be taken care of. And we're into that. And if you don't believe that, then you don't know us very well. Now, are we perfect? No. But listen, at some point, God and us as leaders, we're going to challenge you for your own good to grow, that you have to now learn to love. You have to now learn to serve others. You have to now learn to give it away, to have something to give. And if that rubs you the wrong way, or that offends you, then I want to tell you, there isn't a church in the world that you're going to find that you're going to be able to grow in. You can keep attending, but you'll never grow. You'll never grow. One of my favorite sayings, I don't know if I invented it, but I love it. It says, I said that marriage is your best and last chance to grow up. Mm-hmm. Because it's in the context of marriage, that people that go into marriage just for what they're going to get, oh, this is so great. I'm finally going to be loved. I'm finally going to have guilt-free sex. I'm finally going to be all these things that you want, right? But what happens is you wake up one day and you realize, oh, wait, I have to give? What? Mm-hmm. I have to serve? What? I have to die to my desires? Oh, that's not what I want. And so people go from church to church, or relationship to relationship, or job to job, looking for this perfect environment, not realizing that, like Jason testing the pool, that I actually hold some of the chemicals that make this thing balanced and livable.
Listen to this last part. I think of this last part almost like the chore chart that lives on your fridge, right? Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Right? Because what happens, sometimes I see people that are like exasperated with their teenagers, and they just think, I don't like teenagers. Teenagers are a pain or whatever. I don't understand that, because I feel like you raise the kid you want. And I mean, we're all human beings with free will, and we do our own stuff. But I love this age in my kid's life because they're contributing now to the household. They haven't got jobs yet, but that's coming. but we can finish a meal now, right? It's one of the most joyous things in the world to finish a meal and go, okay, girls, clean up. Oh, I love it. It's so amazing. I remember when my parents used to do that, and I felt like a slave, like, oh, you just had me to work. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how much work they'd put into me.
Yeah.
Right? I had no idea of the sacrifices that had gone into just keeping me alive. And just to be made to, I have to vacuum? Oh my goodness, I do everything around here. Right? But guys, that's the idea. We're just asking, like, hey, just check out the chore chart on the fridge sometime. Go back to the back, Talk to Diana at the table and say, hey, what's on the list? What are the things that need done in the family that we can contribute to? Because if it's just being joyful, where do you need someone joyful? You need someone with patience.
If you're joyful, would you be a greeter?
Yeah.
If you're grumpy, don't be a greeter.
No.
No, just don't do that. We'll find something else for you to do. But
it's true. Are you patient? Because we've got a place for you.
Yeah.
Children's ministry. It's
children.
called.
Yeah. Yeah. Faithful. Listen to that chart. Again, I'm looking at my own heart. I'm checking the pH in my pool of my life. Joyful in hope. Joyful in hope. We live in a world that is increasingly cynical and increasingly more fearful because of what's going on around us. Hope. Man, hope is contagious. Hope is encouraging. Hope is assuring. No one likes to be around Eeyore, right? Seriously, hope that's rooted in faith. Not hope that's just hoping in whatever, but hope that is rooted in faith. That says, no, there's a security in my life that is not determined by my circumstances or how people treat me or world events. I'm telling you, you see, what we're talking now, what's going to happen is Paul, he's going to begin to shift. This is written to the church, by the way. Paul's writing this to the community believers, this pool that we get to practice in. And he's going to make a shift here. At Practice Hospitality, you're going to see he's going to turn outwardly now and talk about those who may not share our pool with us, but visit it. But Practice Hospitality, the word there is a concept of opening my home or my life to people and welcoming them with warm generosity. I don't know who invented fast food. My guess would be it was an American. And I'm not 100% confident of that. But you've been to a fast food restaurant, right?
I am.
Yeah,
it was an American.
Yeah, it was.
Sure.
You walk up to a counter. You're hungry. You look on a menu. What do you want? Number 9. Okay. You want that medium or large? Medium. Okay. Here's a number. Sit down. We'll bring it to you. No, that's not hospitality. That's eating. That's just eating. It is eating.
It's just a transaction.
Yeah, it is. You give them the money, you give them a number and the money, they bring your food out and set it down. Now, those of you that maybe have lived or are from other nations, you see that hospitality has a whole different meaning. Now, hospitality, interestingly enough, still involves food and it still involves requests, but what happens is it's done in a totally different environment. And Paul's saying, this word practice hospitality is probably 25 times in the New Testament throughout the Word of God. Because this hospitality is, I deliberately open my home or my life up to people who may or may not be close friends. And we come around a table and we not only share food, but we share life together. We share experience. We share a warmth of a table. I'm telling you guys, that I believe this thing alone, this practice hospitality, we try to do it here. We do it in this little goofy thing we call the coffee break. And all we're trying, it's not really about coffee at all. I'm sorry, it's a bait and switch. It's a people break. And coffee seems to work because we live in the Northwest. If we were in the Bahamas, it'd probably be a milkshake break or something. I don't know what. But it's about, what it's about is about warmth. It's about connecting. It's about generosity. It's about bringing people near you. Now, some of us here in the room go, oh, I could do that if I just had a bigger house. Martha Stewart was my mother-in-law. I could do that. If I knew how to cook, I could do that. And so even in America, what's happening is there's a trend is we don't even bring people, we meet people in restaurants for dinner. We don't have them in our homes. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you, people are not so much interested in what you're cooking. They're interested in just visiting your pond. Mm-hmm. And being around your children, being around a believer. Mm-hmm. I believe it's one of the most powerful evangelistic tools the church has in its box. And yet it's one of the most unused because we feel like we have to be perfect or we just simply don't want people around us. I don't want to be around you. I just want to, I'll meet you somewhere. But and Paul is saying here to this church, he's saying, look, you guys, practice hospitality. You imagine if we're 400 people here this morning and everybody just went after one neighbor between now and the end of summer. And maybe you don't want to have them in your living room, but maybe you have them on your deck. And maybe you can't make, I don't know, chicken cordon bleu, but you can do a salmon burger from Costco. You know, the point is that it's around that table that people watch our lives and get involved in our lives. And some of the people around the table may not fit. They may never set foot in this particular environment. But when you reach out and bring them into your environment, they're connected with the Jesus that you believe in.
Can I point out one thing that would be toxic to this, and that would be partaking in a culture war. Now, the Bible uses the war metaphor over and over again, so it's there. We could talk about war; it's all right. But if you see the war as that person across the street or that guy that believes this, then you've already lost. It's over. How many times have you seen in headlines, it's this new thing that keeps coming up over and over again to try to get you to click on something. It'll say something like, Jon Stewart demolishes the Republican Party, right? Or the other way around, the Republican Party destroys Hillary Clinton's platform. And it's these words of fighting, of destruction, of, they annihilated this argument. You go to YouTube and it's like, oh, this Christian destroys this atheist in a debate. I'm like, it sounds terrible. Oh my goodness. I'm sure he just got on his knees and repented after that, right? That must be what they mean, right? That he fell in love with Jesus after this. And remember where this is at and when this is happening is right here in the middle of a real war. They were really trying to destroy Christians, not just their ideology, them.
Yeah, literally.
The people. And Paul's equipping them not with swords and spears, and he's equipping them with hospitality. He's equipping them with joy. He's equipping them with hope. And you know what he says about it? At the beginning of this letter, in the very beginning of Romans, as he's describing what's already been happening, what's being reported to them, he says this: first, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. Somehow these weapons that they're using are being spoken of all over the world now. The kingdom of God is so subversive. It's so backwards from everything that we're used to that just doing what it says gets headlines. Just obeying Jesus will get you in front of kings because nobody's doing it.
Yeah. So he's going to turn now and kind of come in for a landing here. He's going to turn and reach out of what this love in action looks like outside. He says in verse 14, bless those who persecute you and do not curse them. What he's about to say here is, I believe, is impossible in just your human strength. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. It's funny, last week, just the way things work in the summer around here, I did 3 weddings and a funeral in 8 days. And so, you had not only put on different clothes, but you put on different faces, so to speak, right? So it was crazy how in a wedding, people gather around to rejoice with you. And that's exactly what should happen. But here the next day is a grandma who went to be with Jesus, who'd served the Lord and loved her kids and her grandkids, and they gathered to weep together. Same anchor, the same hope of an eternal kingdom. And that's what we do here. And it's funny, I was commenting at the funeral. They asked me, well, how's your week been? I said, it's funny, I just did a wedding yesterday. And I said, but this is what we do. We marry and we bury together. That's what community does, guys. We rejoice with each other and we mourn with each other because we are genuinely with each other. And I believe those two things are very important that Paul put in there. In the good times, it's relatively easy to rejoice with everybody. But in the bad times, oftentimes, we want to isolate ourselves. We want to run and hide because we feel like, well, we're an embarrassment or this is painful or I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. But listen, we need to approach rejoicing and mourning with the same attitude of community. Hey, I love you. You need someone to cry with you? I'm here. In the Old Testament, they'd hire mourners. They'd hire professional people to come cry. I need 10 criers on Friday. They literally would hire people to come mourn. That's hypocrisy. I'm doing something because I'm getting paid for it. And in our community, we rejoice with those who rejoice. We mourn with those who mourn. We live in harmony with one another. Now, Paul's going to list a bunch of things that are toxic to relationships. We started with, he said, don't be proud. Be willing to associate with people of low position. That is, the word there literally means to take a menial job, to do things that are beneath your dignity, so to speak. Everybody likes to be thought of as a servant. The real test is when someone starts treating you like one, right? So he says, serve one another. He said, do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, be a person of peace. Live at peace with everyone. There's enough there to keep us busy till kingdom come. Till kingdom come.
Just that piece of conceit and being conceited. I think sometimes we forget how easy it is to come off that way, even if we really don't intend to. Because there's that idea out there that, well, you think you've got absolute truth, and so already I just don't believe you. And yet somehow Jesus held absolute truth. He was never ever wrong, not once. And he was a still attractive person to be around. People would move towards him and want to spend time with him. And sinners, the most wrong people, wanted to be with the most right person. But can we say that about us? If you just maybe we pick on it too much, but just go back and look through Facebook history and see. Do I look like I know it all? Like I have it all together? Like I've got all the answers and I'm right and I've destroyed opinions and I've crushed this and does it look like that, or do you look humble? Do you look in harmony? Because that's the opposite word he's using here is harmony. Because what's conceit? It's like it's that off note. You can all hear it. Maybe if you don't know music, when you hear something that's off, you're like, ugh, you're a little pitchy, bro. You're a little pitchy dog. But when we hear something in harmony, even if we can't do it, we're like, that's it.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
Who takes a selfie of their bad side? I mean, seriously, no. You do? Thank you, brother.
Zach, you don't have a bad side.
Yeah. Zach, you're just bad all around. But it's like, really, who does that, right? So if anybody, see, what we're talking about here is imitation. Be imitators of Christ, Paul would write to the church. If anybody had a right to self-exalt, it was the Lord Jesus. If anybody had a right to be absorbed, if anybody had a right to demand worship and so forth while he was on the earth, it was Jesus. But what did he do? He served. He just served. He was patient in affliction. He was, all the things we're talking about. Imitators. That's what this love thing is about, is being an imitator.
Harmony isn't about being the loudest or being the most vocal. It's about fitting in, right? Sometimes you can't even tell who's doing that. Which one of them? That sounds amazing.
It's complementing the lead.
Yeah. Isn't
that amazing? So it's interesting what you find here in this passage. If you could just throw it up, we're gonna end here. But in that list of things, you find there both our fallen nature and our godly nature. When the Pharisees came to Jesus and they said, okay, so give us the greatest commandment. Do you remember what Jesus said? He said this, I'll give it to you. It's in Matthew 22. He said, love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest, and the second's like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now here's the catch. The preposition as. Because what he's not saying here is, well, just love everybody and there's nothing in it for you. In fact, he gives us a qualifier. He says, love your neighbor. Well, how should I love my neighbor? Well, as you love yourself. Oh, let me think about that. Let's see. As myself. We're called, listen, I like a place to live. I like having extra money. I like having friends. I like being loved. And those are all things, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of those things. But that God knew that in us. And so when he calls us to love, he gives us this, we need a qualifier for this, right? You need something you need to get a handle on this? This is easy. Do you love yourself? Think about how you love yourself. And that's not wrong. He says, but now I just want you to test those. I want you to love so-and-so just like you love yourself. Oh, no. Whoa, wait a minute. Think about that. How am I supposed to love? Well, as much as I love myself. Would I want to be alone in a crowd with no one talking to me? Would I want to be ignored? Would I want to be gossiped about? Would I want to be cheated on? No, that's crazy. Okay, that's easy then. You want to know how to act towards others? Mm-hmm. As yourself. As yourself.
Why is that scary though? I mean, let's be honest. If it's easy to explain, why do we have a hard time with it? I mean, that's what makes this so beautiful. This answer is just so perfect. It's like, oh, that's beautiful. Does anybody live it? Oh, no, not that many people really. Why? Because we're afraid. Because what happens if I think, well, if I was hungry, I'd want to eat. You don't have anything and I've got something. Well, I've got two options here, really. If I'm supposed to love you the same way I love myself, I could take half of what I have, peel it off, and give it to you, or I could just give you my whole plate. But what does that feel like? That feels like I'm loving you instead of myself, doesn't it? It feels like loss. It feels like, because we see the world as a closed system. There's only so many pieces to this pie, and if I start giving away my piece, I'm not going to have a piece. And so we react out of fear, and we hold close, and we hoard. It's the whole manna thing all over again, right? He's going to provide for us every day as we need, and we're supposed to just take what we need, and yet we don't. We go for more. And what happens, what does that say? It says a couple things, but I think importantly, it says something about what we believe about God. Because what we believe about God is, if I do that for them, I'm going to be without, which means God's not meeting my needs. I've got to meet my needs. And so it's a lack of faith, really. And so we go back to the very first thing of the greatest commandment is to love God. If we're truly loving God for who he really is and understanding that he is the great provider, then it's no longer a fearful thing for me to turn around and take off my Cascade sweatshirt and give it to that poor woman who looks cold. Now, God has two options when we do stuff like this. If I really take off my, like was said at the offering time, if I take off my Cascade sweatshirt and give it to her, what have I done? I've solved her problem and I've created one for me. Right? She is now warm and I am cold. So God has two options. He can provide me with another Cascade sweatshirt, or he can give me grace. Grace is an amazing thing. And Paul would describe it oftentimes that he would actually rather have the gift of grace than the gift of provision. Hey, provision's great. I've learned how to abound in it sometimes, but other times I've learned to be abased. I've learned to live in jail cells. And I'll tell you what, the grace is pretty good, he says.
You know, our country, and I believe our world, is moving closer and closer to what I call a state-enforced love your neighbor. It's called socialism. It's a state-enforced love your neighbor. You're not going to share, so here's what I'm going to do. You have and you have not, so I'm going to take from you and I'm going to give it to them. Now, I'm not here to argue politics, but the world recognizes something, that there's inequality, there's injustice. Yeah. And so he calls the church to take the initiative and give lavishly and generously. So much so that a lost world says, hey, did you have to do that? Is that like a tax thing you have to do? Is that like a college thing you have to put in so many hours? Oh yeah, I got to put in 42 hours or I don't graduate. I'm sorry if you have to do that, but if you're just doing it because you have to do it to graduate, you've lost your reward. You may get out of college, but you've lost your reward. I'm just being straight up here. The church is this lavish mystery. What in the world? Why would you love me? I'm such a jerk. You know what? I can't explain it. I don't know what it is. I do though. Where does that come from? It's called grace. It's called transformation and redemption in my life. Why would you forgive me? I don't know. I can't quite explain it, but Augustine said this: if you're suffering from a bad man's injustice, forgive him lest there be two bad men. And so this is going to be what Paul finishes with. We'll finish too. The worship team can come up. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay. And these sounds like whoa, that kind of took a harsh turn in a way. But here's what God is saying here. He's saying, look, We live in a broken world, and people are going to treat us badly. Even like you can walk out here thinking, you know what, I'm so inspired. I'm just going to love somebody. And then they just flip you off in traffic. And you're like, all right, I'm done. It didn't work for me. Well, when people treat us badly, Paul is going to speak to that right now. He's going to say, look, don't take revenge. Leave room for God's justice. It's mine to avenge. I will repay. But if your enemy is hungry, if this enemy that you have in your life, this person that is giving you grief is hungry, why don't you feed him? If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. What? I don't want to bless him. God, I'm not in the mood to do that right now. You don't know what she did to me. You don't know how I was treated. This doesn't feel right. Of course it doesn't feel right. But God is saying, I want you to live. I want you to obey me. I want you to follow me here. I want you to feed them. I want you to give them something to drink. I want you to wish them well. And in so doing, it says, you heap coals of fire on their head. Yeah, that's what I'm after. Yeah. I want to see him burn. That is not what he's saying here. What he's saying here is, he's saying when you respond, okay, so when someone treats you badly, the natural human reaction is, I'm going to treat you badly. And all of a sudden, like Augustine said, we have two bad people now. So if you're angry towards me, I'm going to be angry towards you. If you cheat on me, I'm going to cheat on you. This is what I see people do in relationships all the time. Well, you cheated on me, so I'm going to cheat on you. I have a right to do this. But really the issue is, you're going to pay, sucker. I'm going to inflict some pain on you right now because you inflicted pain on me. Paul says, no. You do that, and you become just like them. And there is no grace. And this is a joke. But Paul says, you treat them in the opposite spirit by my grace. And what you're doing in the Old Testament, they would carry around coals. And they didn't have the flick your Bix to light the fire. And so you had to keep live coals all the time, 24/7, in order for you to have a fire in the morning. And so if your coals went out in the night, you'd go to a neighbor, and you would have this giant metal thing, and you would bring, hey, brother, I need some coals because my fire's gone out. And so that neighbor would load up that plate and take it back. What Paul's saying is, load the plate, man. So that guy feels the heat. Because when you load that plate with your goodness, God's conviction is going to fall. You open the way for God to work. And if you don't, then you're on your own in this. And that's why he closes with this passage. He says, the last verse, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do not let evil overcome you, steal your joy. Some of you are young here this morning, and you've endured some real injustice. When I say that, I mean people or life didn't treat you fairly. A relationship failed. A business deal went sideways. Someone didn't keep their word. And the warfare against your soul is it would ruin you now. And I want to say to you this morning, you have tons of life ahead of you. There's a God who cares about you, and there's a God who will have the last word in your life. Father, as we finish this morning, I want to encourage you this morning as we wrap up here to, in a sense, picture yourself in the office with Dr. Jesus. You've come for a checkup, and the blood pressure cuff is on your arm, and the thermometer is under your tongue. In your heart, you've had heart pain. That's why you're in the office. And he's checking your vital signs. What's the temperature of your relationship with God? What's the temperature of your relationship with your family and people in your life? Is your heart healthy? Or is it cold? And is it hard? Keith Green wrote a song years ago. It said, what can be done with an old heart like mine? Soften it up, Lord, with oil and wine. The oil is you, your spirit of love. Come fill me anew with the wine of your love. As we finish this morning, I believe God has brought some of you here because He's in a sense, He's been waiting for you to keep this appointment. You've been avoiding this appointment for months because you didn't want to hear the news. You didn't want to see the results. You don't want to take the test. He's a good doctor who wants to heal you. He doesn't want to kill you. He wants to heal you. The pain of your divorce, the pain of the betrayal, the pain of just your singleness, whatever it is, that just, man, your heart is just, it's just not well. If that's you this morning, God calls you here just to come clean before Him and say, God, I need you to soften up this heart of mine. We're going to, if you need someone in the body, a man or a woman, to come alongside you and pray for you, as we finish, we're going to be up in the front here on the left and the right. If you're a prayer person, would you come and pray with us? And any of our leaders that are here, our prayer team, and if you can get on both sides, and if you're here this morning, you just need someone to come up next to you and put their hand on you and say, hey, me too, man. Me too. I want to pray for you. Or you're just stuck and you don't know what to do. This could be your moment. If you've never crossed the line and given your life to this Jesus who calls you, this is your day. This is your moment. You're not here by accident this morning.
Yeah.
It's time to come home. You've been on the run long enough. It's time to come home.
Yeah.
So we're going to worship as we finish and pray. Feel free to come